Germany's economy is struggling.
It'll get worse before it gets better.
When the employer don't get our solution, we strike again.
For much of its post-war history, Germany has been a beacon of prosperity and political stability. It's Europe's largest and the world's fourth largest economy in terms of GDP. And the label Made in Germany is ubiquitous for quality and innovation. But in recent years, its economy has been stagnating and social harmony has given way to acrimony and division. Earlier this year, Berlin streets were choked with tractors and farmers blaring horns in furious protest of proposed budget cuts. Then train engineers walked off the job to demand better pay, stranding commuters and carloads of freight and leaving the country angry and gridlocked. They were soon too followed by workers from the country's largest airline, local public transit operators, and truck drivers. But yet again, Germany is still considered one of the world's richest countries. But studies do show that the poverty rate is at 14.5%, and just over 1/5 of Germany's population is categorized at risk of poverty or social exclusion, placing it well behind its peers across the continent. So how poor are we here in Germany? And should we all be angry about it? Well, let's take a look. But first, I want to say a big thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring this video and keeping my online identity safe with the best VPN available. If you don't know what a VPN is, it stands for Virtual Private Network, and it encrypts all of the data sent between your computer and the internet so no one can steal your personal information. And while traveling around Germany via train has been a personal favorite of mine and my family's, it also means that we end up spending a lot of time on public Wi-Fi, which can be a gold mine for hackers, and the best way to protect yourself is with a VPN. But a VPN can be used for so much more than just security. It can also be used to unlock content that isn't in your area. It's super easy to change the virtual location of your computer and get virtual access to a completely new content library. Another very handy tool, I might add, for researching international topics. So if you don't already have a VPN, head over to Surfshark and give it a try. I highly recommend them because it's the only VPN service that allows you to have one account for multiple devices. Secure your privacy with Surfshark today and use my code TYPEASHTON for 4 months extra. There's no risk to try it out. To get started, click the link down below in the description of this video. So what does poverty look like in Germany? Well, in this context, it doesn't mean that millions of people in Germany are at risk of starving or freezing to death. Instead, it refers to relative poverty, which is measured by the average living conditions of the society in question. In 2021, Germany was ranked the 20th richest country in the world measured by GDP per capita. This means that if you add up the value of all of the goods and commodities produced in a country and divide that figure by the number of its inhabitants, you get $50,700 per person per year in Germany on average. By comparison, that number is $136,700 in Luxembourg, the world's richest country. And although there are a number of different measurement tools that somebody could use to gauge the poverty in the country, here in Germany, Der Status, or the Federal Statistic Office, measures something called the at-risk of poverty rate. According to a press release from May of 2023, around 12 million people were at risk of poverty, or around 14.4% of the population. Breaking this down by state, the at-risk of poverty rate in 2022 was the highest in Bremen at 28.4%, followed by North Rhine-Westphalia at 19.5% and Saxony-Anhalt at 19.3%. But countrywide, 6.1% of the population, or 5.1 million people in Germany, were affected by significant material and social deprivation in 2022. To put this within a broader European perspective, Germany is definitely not the worst off, but it isn't the best either. And those who fit into that at-risk of poverty category, I think might surprise you. As inflation skyrockets in Germany, more and more people will find themselves unable to make ends meet without assistance. It's becoming increasingly difficult for many to afford bread, milk, fruit, and vegetables, which are over 12% more expensive than they were just 2 years ago. Plus, the number of people who cannot live on their current income despite having a full-time job is also increasing, and that's despite the recent increase in the minimum wage. At 12 euros per hour, a single person with no children who works 40 hours a week would receive a net income of around 1,480 euros per month. Although this is nominally above the poverty line, that excess has been eaten up by inflation. Students are also greatly affected by the situation, especially recipients of federal funding. These students receive a maximum of 934 euros a month, which includes money for housing and health insurance. This amount puts students well below the poverty line. And last but not least, poverty is also on the rise amongst the elderly in Germany. After decades of work, their pension is often not enough to cover their monthly expenses. Women in particular are feeling this strain, as they are more likely to have worked part-time and have been paid less. According to a new study from the Bertelsmann Foundation, old age poverty is expected to affect 20% of Germans by 2036. But we'll talk more about Germany's aging population a little bit later in this video. But you know, the poverty rate is actually only one part of this equation, and the general consensus is that it really does feel like wealth is being concentrated into the hands of fewer and fewer people. And the German economy isn't growing fast enough to benefit everyone. So I think it's best that we now take a look at what many economists are saying is often the underappreciated reason behind a lot of the public outrage: an ever-increasing and grossly unequal distribution of wealth. According to a Bundesbank survey in 2021, the top 10% of households have at least 725,000 euros of net assets and control more than half the country's wealth, while the bottom 40% of households have at most 44,000 euros of net assets. But of course, these are the extremes of the wealth distribution. And if we're really trying to understand what the public outrage is about wealth inequalities in Germany, well, we need to look in the middle and see how these things are affecting the middle class. In Germany, the median household income reported just 107,000 euros of net assets. To put that into perspective, the median German household has only a little more net wealth than the median Greek household. A country, by the way, with triple the unemployment rate and an average income that's 40% of Germany's. Of course, there is the argument that maybe Germans just don't simply need as much money to live a comfortable and fulfilling life. After all, childcare is free in some German states. So is public tuition at universities. And lately, labor unions have won pay hikes, while savers have entered higher interest on bank deposits. Farmers, too, have earned higher profits, even despite the protests. However, fewer than half of the households own a home, and hence haven't benefited from soaring property prices. The median wealth of German tenant households is just 16,000 euros, according to the Bundesbank. So, of course, when you add inflation on top of all of this, it's completely reasonable to see why many Germans just simply don't feel like they have enough to make ends meet. Of the 2,059 respondents to a survey conducted by YouGov, a British marketing research institute, on behalf of Postbank, 17.2% admitted that they can hardly afford their living costs due to high inflation. The survey indicated that a lot more people feel the pressure of rising food and energy prices. Some 30% of the respondents said they relied on their savings to get by. Only 39% said their income was enough to cover the additional costs of living as a result of the price hikes. And these findings corroborate a slew of reports, news articles, and media attention which underscore the difficulty of living and working in Germany. But is it that way for everyone? Now, there is a way that somebody could take a look at this same set of data and draw maybe a little bit of a different conclusion. With rising income inequality dominating the headlines in Germany, the question looms: are Germans really poor, or does Germany just simply have more rich-friendly policies and tax schemes that effectively just concentrate wealth into the hands of a few? After all, more than 9,000 Germans have a net worth of at least $50 million, which is the world's third highest concentration of super wealthy people. And yeah, you would probably have to have a pretty high income to be able to afford the majority of the lineup offered by Porsche, Audi, Mercedes, or BMW. But to be fair, rich is a relative term. Does rich mean having 135 million euros in assets, including a 10-bedroom villa in Hamburg's Blankenese district, plus a spacious holiday home in Mallorca and a yacht like music magnate Dieter Bohlen? Or does it mean having a small independent business valued at $1 million that can pay the salary of one or two other employees, support a mortgage on a house, and a yearly family ski vacation? Well, perhaps then maybe the best definition of who is rich in Germany is just simply who benefits the most from the existing tax structures. The OECD and leading German economists have long criticized the country's tax system because the burden is skewed too much towards wages, while property and inheritance taxes are low. There are sweeping inheritance tax exemptions for business owners, for example, on the grounds that jobs and investment might otherwise be endangered. And yeah, I think there is an argument to be had that these rules are probably too cushy, especially when the upshot is taxes on large inheritances are often lower than a smaller bequest. But to be honest, when it comes to wealth, German people are often pegged as being poorer than citizens in poorer nations by studies compiled by international banks and international finance institutions because of what might be just a flawed methodology in how they're examining wealth in the first place. And I think this is a caveat that I really need to mention at this part in the video. In many countries, the largest part of provision for old age comes from investments in capital stocks. If there's a pay-as-you-go pension system, like Social Security in the United States or the state pension in the UK, it's merely a basic income to avoid old people becoming totally destitute. You cannot have a comfortable existence off of it, and you really have to invest in capital assets so that you actually have something to spend in your old age. But in contrast, here in Germany, the pension system actually pays out a decent amount if you've had a long working life. But the expectation of that pension is not reckoned as personal wealth in statistics compiled by banks. These entitlements cannot be sold or used as security for a loan, so they're really of no interest to financial institutions. So for example, if you are watching this video and you're a 50-something-year-old German, you and your employer, between the two of you, have now paid about 3.5 times your annual gross income as pension contributions. If that were counted as a capital asset, you'd be reckoned as moderately wealthy. But as this is a payment into a pay-as-you-go pension system, it's really not counted as a capital asset. Your pension will be merely an income when it will be paid out. So under a capital stock-based pension system like a Roth IRA in the United States, you would be rich on paper. Under the German system, you're poor on paper, even with a comparable income in old age. Banks don't really like pay-as-you-go pension systems because they're too efficient. They merely collect money and pay it out, leaving no opportunity for financial institutions to have people's capital to invest and get their cut. So when banks say, well, Germans are poor, they might just mean poor in a means of wealth accumulation that we can't also benefit from. And honestly, at the end of the day, after all of these discussions on what is wealth, how do we measure it, and who ultimately has it, it begs the question, should we be angry about the way things are distributed currently here in Germany? And I think my reply would honestly be, I think we should all be angry, whether you're German or not. Whether you live in North America or in Europe, the two regions I most frequently cover on this channel, we all share a lot in common when it comes to this topic because in some regards, the average family is equally as poor. Since 2008, nominal US GDP has outpaced that of the European Union to the point that the EU is now just 2/3 of the economy that the US is, rather than the prior near parity. US nominal GDP per capita is nearing Singapore's, while all of Europe, except for small rich states like Norway and Monaco, are significantly behind. But these aren't reasons for American superiority, nor really is it grounds to say that Americans are somehow unfathomably more wealthier than Germans or other Europeans. Money, wealth, and value are three related but different things that are easy to confuse with each other. Money is what you have to use to exchange wealth. That is, goods or services from which you then derive some tangible or intangible value. The traditional view of wealth is that it's not just about having money, but also about having that money go somewhere, far enough to provide a certain amount of value from a certain amount of wealth. There's arguably already such an updated modern-day definition, which we term quality of life, and ironically is something that Americans far more readily admit is superior in Europe. To say that the quality of life is higher in Europe because there's less work, less crime, less driving, better and healthier food, and better public services is just to list a bunch of ways that Europeans are collectively wealthier than Americans. But we frame this in a specific way to prevent this kind of wealth from being accounted. And quite frankly, when it comes to wealth in the monetary sense, unless you're in that top 10%, no matter where you live, you're probably getting the short end of the stick. Wealth buttresses financial security for families and is much more concentrated among the top tier of wealth holders, with households in the top 10% of wealth distribution in high-income countries owning more than half of all household wealth. In the United States, they own 79% of it. In Germany, 60%. So at a time of acute health and economic crisis, widening divisions are raising moral, social, economic, and political challenges. As Germany and other countries strive to rebuild their economies, governments have an opening to alleviate unfair economic disparities and improve access to opportunities. And maybe, perhaps, a healthy dose of anger and frustration will be enough to really get things moving and to get governments to change their current existing policies. But I would really love to hear your thoughts on this down below in the comment section. If you're a German watching this video, how do you feel about the current status of living in Germany, whether that's in an economic sense or in a quality of life sense? And how does this distribution of wealth ultimately impact the way you feel you're being treated by existing tax structures? I think that would be a really interesting discussion to have. And then, of course, if you're watching this from outside of Germany, I think a lot of these topics ultimately pinpoint a lot of issues that are happening elsewhere around the globe, especially when it comes to rising income inequalities. Again, I would love to hear your thoughts and reactions down below in the comment section, so be sure to leave them there. And as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you next Sunday. Cheers!